Hi, fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. Today's story features a sweet romance that blends the pain of grief with the joy of love. It's written by Nicole Wheeler, who's fascinated by storytelling and the formative power of the stories we love. She earned her bachelor's degree in acting and directing theater, and while earning her master's degree, she explored the intersection between what we believe and the media we consume. Fascinated with storytelling in multiple forms, she began writing fiction, learning craft, and the business of the book world in earnest in 2018. Stick around to the end, or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from the author. For now, please enjoy After Stars Fall by Nicole Wheeler. Lyra would have another chance that night. She feigned disinterest, discreetly watching Gran assemble a basket of food at the other end of the taproom counter. The message had come less than an hour before, asking for Papa's help at the lighthouse.
"Dinner for your father,"
Gran announced, though Lyra clearly understood who it was for.
"He'll be gone the whole night and then fall right into bed and sleep most of the morning away," she coaxed.
Lyra nodded and smiled pleasantly, pretending to miss what Gran was implying, that Lyra could slip out after dark, unmissed. She felt Gran's eyes on her as she prepared a tray of hot cider and biscuits, keeping her head down as her thoughts spun out. The lightkeeper, a gnarled ancient seaman with no family of his own, had called for assistance at least half a dozen times that spring. Papa was one of the few men with the knowledge and freedom to come at short notice when the coughing fits overtook him and sent him back to his bed. Well, she didn't need to wonder any longer if Gran knew about her late-night outings, and if she knew that Lyra snuck out every time Papa went to the lighthouse, then Gran would know there were only two possible explanations. She exited from behind the counter carrying the tray. Hopefully, Gran thinks I'm sneaking off to meet a boy. The thought nearly tripped her as she walked to the group of young men sitting in the corner, efficiently neglecting the textbooks they'd come to the taproom to study. Their good-natured laughter made the room seem brighter somehow. Dean and his friends had gotten into a routine of studying for the university entrance exams together in the cozy taproom of the Noble Inn. Lyra couldn't decide how she felt about the development. On one hand, she had to stifle her annoyance that the boys were flaunting the likelihood they'd move to the university in a few short months. Attending university would take a miracle she didn't have on hand. All right, maybe flaunting wasn't fair. They couldn't know that she wouldn't be able to attend. Lyra wouldn't bother taking the entrance exam, so there was no need to study. No need to be envious, and certainly no need to be annoyed that they were squandering their study time. Lyra was top of their class, and it only irked her a little that she wasn't first in line to go. Just the same, it thrilled her a little each time he came in with his friends. Lyra was unquestionably the smartest in class, but Dean was probably second smartest, and the most handsome. She shook her head as she deposited the tray at their table, annoyed with herself. It was a perfectly reasonable place for them to meet to study. It had nothing to do with the fact that her family owned the inn, or the likelihood she'd be working the taproom when it was busy. That thought led in a direction best not to open herself up to. "Thank you, Lyra." Dean beamed a glorious smile up at her. He seemed to want to say more, but Lyra bobbed a polite nod and quickly turned on her heel, retreating to the counter. She didn't want to explore the reason behind the flush she felt burn her cheeks when he said her name. She certainly didn't want anyone to notice it. Nonetheless, she felt Gran watch her escape, a knowing smile on her face. Lyra silently prayed that Gran would keep her observations to herself. Maybe she'd rather talk about the stars after all, instead of the young man sitting in the corner with his friends. Him, or the hopes and disappointments that lingered in the corner with him that she preferred to ignore. The sound of Papa stomping down the stairs saved her from whatever Gran was poised to say. He smiled warmly at them each in turn, taking the basket.
I'll be back after sunrise. Go ahead and close the taproom early. No need to take chances with a full— Get out with your ridiculous suggestions, boy.
Gran swatted his arm.
I've run this inn longer than you've been alive, and I expect you to go straight to bed when you come home and stay there until noon tomorrow at least, if we're handing out unnecessary orders to grown adults. You'll turn useless without enough sleep. I've got a few strapping lads over in the corner to call on if we need assistance.
She nodded over her shoulder, smiling mischievously.
And if it comes to it, I've got my loaded pistol under the bar, same as I do every time you go to the lighthouse.
She winked at Lyra. Papa yielded with a smile and kissed them both good night before he hefted the overpacked basket out the door. This little argument was becoming something of a ritual on nights he went to the lighthouse. Lyra didn't miss the assessing look Papa shot the group in the corner on his way out. Gran waited 2 full hours before she began prodding Lyra again between tending patrons, dropping not-so-sly comments.
It's a perfect night for a go-at-it, over a frothy tankard to a burly fisherman. You'll regret it if you don't try,
as Lyra passed payment from a table for Gran to deposit in the drawer.
The stars aren't going to fall too many more times this season, I'd reckon.
This time, Gran cornered her in the crook of the counter, where there was no escape to a table or patron waiting for a mug. Lyra's heart sank to her feet. Gran did know. It took a moment too long for Lyra to shake off her surprise, to be convincing when she said, "I don't know what you're talking about." She tried to look Gran in the eye, tried to give substance to the lie, but she couldn't measure up to the steely wisdom she saw in the older woman's unfaltering gaze. It held no judgment, only a challenge. "Well, I have gone to watch once or twice." Gran's intense stare did not falter.
"Only to watch?"
Lyra relented, dropping her eyes to her hands, her voice low. "Might as well be. I've tried every night Papa's gone to the lighthouse, and I've got nothing to show for it. Maybe Mama didn't really have the gift, that it was just something she made up for my bedtime stories. Or maybe it simply didn't pass on to me." Lyra sighed and began wiping down the counter, chin to chest, trying to erase the disappointment gnawing in her stomach. She felt Gran step close, voice low despite the din of the taproom.
"She did."
Lyra's breath hitched at Gran's confession. No one had ever acknowledged her mother's gift to her before.
"I saw it with my own eyes. The gathering talent, call it magic maybe, is so rare that most believe it's just an old fairy tale. But why else would people think they could wish on a star and get anything for their trouble? I witnessed her bring them home more than once. It's because of her gift we have you. I believe you have it too."
As a little girl, Lyra believed Mama's stories about the clever women of their family line who knew how to find the pieces of broken stars fallen from the sky. Shards that held enough magic to meet one simple need, an earnest, sincere wish that wasn't rooted in greed or malice. The stars knew better, Mama had said. She'd spun beautiful tales about the majestic starfalls that came in the spring, and had promised to teach Lyra the family secret when she was older. But the stories stopped when her mother died. She'd never dared ask Gran or Papa any of her questions and risk opening old wounds. She didn't know precisely when her belief in Mother's stories wilted, but when the starfalls began again at the first thaw that year, they revealed an ember of hope still alive in Lyra. Gran's strong arm on her shoulder brought her out of her thoughts. "The counter is clean, my dear." 30 minutes after they closed the taproom for the night, Lyra stepped out from the front porch of the inn, Prince Rollo at her heels. She'd spent the time watching the sky and scratching the pup's belly. When the intermittent streaks started across the horizon, all she'd said was, "Let's go," and he joyfully bounded in her wake. tongue lolling out the side of his smiling mouth. The cute little mutt didn't understand the nighttime outings she took him on, but he clearly didn't mind. His presence comforted her, encouraged her. Rollo practically pranced as he kept pace with her, his tail curled all the way up to his back. They'd made it to the edge of town when Rollo stopped, alerting her to something behind. Lyra tensed and reached for her dagger. "Who's there?" She didn't carry much with her on these outings, just a small lantern, a bag tucked in her belt, and a dagger in her boot, just in case. Their little hamlet was usually quite safe, even with the traveling merchants who frequented the cove. Still, she knew it wasn't the smartest idea for her to be out in the dark, alone. "Stay back," she warned, holding her knife out at an angle in the hope it would reflect the moonlight and look menacing. Rollo bounded over to the figure emerging from the shadows, little traitor. Dean stepped around the corner she'd just turned. "Whoa, Lyra, it's just me." He kept his distance, his hands raised. Relieved, Lyra lowered her dagger. "I called your name a block back, but you didn't hear me. I guess I didn't call loud enough. I'm sorry. I was trying not to wake the whole town." Dean knelt down to pet Prince Rollo. "Why are you following me?" "I'm not." She huffed and raised an eyebrow at them both. "Well, I guess I did, after you didn't answer me. The fellas and I had stood out by my family's shop talking for a while after you closed the tap room. I'd said goodnight to the others not long before I noticed you go by. What are you doing out so late?" Lyra looked up to the cliffs beyond the edge of town, unsure how to explain herself. "Oh, are you going to watch the stars fall?" "Yeah, I guess." "Can I walk with you for a bit?" Lyra nodded, not sure what she wanted to say. She'd imagined walking home from school with this boy countless times, but tonight she was on an errand, and it wouldn't do to have an audience. He might think she was crazy, or laugh at her, or worse. Still, a traitorous part of her heart sped up in excitement at the thought of watching the stars with him. "All right." She smiled in the semi-dark as she put away her knife. The trio made their way up to the bluffs above the cove where the little village was nestled. Far in the distance at the other side of the inlet, the lighthouse beam swept across over the rocky shoals and out to sea. Lyra was comforted by the knowledge that her father was up in that tower, manning a beacon that could guide her home. Dean broke the silence after they'd gone some distance across the open land that stretched from the sea cliffs to the edge of the forest. "Do you come up here often for a better view of the star showers?" "Yeah, sometimes," Lyra conceded. "My mother used to tell me stories about them." Dean let out a small laugh. "How is that funny?" "Oh, it isn't. He ran his hand through his hair, as if to loosen his thoughts or master his words. "I apologize. I wasn't laughing at you. It's just—" He faltered again. "I laughed because my father sometimes tells me stories about the stars, too. And about your mother." Lyra snapped to attention at the mention of her mother. She stopped walking to look at him. "My father used to tell me stories of magicians who could charm the stars from the skies and use them to cast magic spells on people. Once, when I was caught sneaking cookies as a little boy, he said he would fetch one and have them turn me into a pocket knife or a new hat. Something useful." He let out a little huff of a laugh, as though embarrassed. Lyra's stomach clenched, morphing into something cold and hollow. "That's appalling. And what does that have to do with my mother?" She did not like where the conversation was headed. She frowned, letting her attention follow Rollo as the pup stalked an insect through the grass. There was no telling what a person thought of magic. It was so rare that most people were unfamiliar with it. Some were ready for awe and wonder. Others, well, others were too quick to fear and too ready to strike out before they understood. The magic didn't even have to be real for fear to overtake someone. It was dangerous for people to even suspect a tie to magic, unless they were capable of enough wonder to outweigh their apprehensions. Even if Mama's stories had been only that, just stories, Lyra had learned some of the lessons Mama had tucked in them. Lyra knew magic didn't have to be real to make monsters out of men. There were good reasons to keep it secret, if it were real at all. He was just teasing me. Dean smiled at the memory. Then he handed me another cookie and mussed my hair and said that he'd rather have his son over a new hat anyway. And as for your mom, apparently he fancied her when they were in school. He used the word enchanting to describe her. He said that he'd wished that one of those sorcerers, gatherers, Lyra mentally corrected him, were real and in our town so he could have asked them to cast a spell to get her to notice him. I don't understand. She desperately wanted to move Dean's thoughts away from stories of magic or her mother. He couldn't know the truth, but he was too close for comfort all the same. She also wanted to get to the point of his story and understand if she should be offended on her mother's behalf, or afraid. You haven't explained what that has to do with my mother, really, or why it made you laugh. Well, my father, he... Dean sighed, as though he were about to make a grave confession. He was teasing me about how often I find an excuse to come to the taproom. He studied her face in the moonlight, searching her eyes. After a moment, he went on. The lads and I could easily study at one of our houses. But the taproom has cookies and cider and fewer chores, Lyra suggested, a peace offering. And you. He swallowed. Lyra suddenly found it difficult to breathe. My father couldn't resist teasing me this afternoon when I told him I would be studying at the taproom again tonight. He speculated that I'd fallen under a magic spell, just as he'd been enchanted with your mother. He huffed an almost laugh, a crooked smile teasing his face. But your parents were already in love, he said, and she didn't take notice of any of the other boys in town. Neither do you, it seems. You don't pay attention to any of the boys in our class. I don't? Her voice was barely above a whisper. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. Then, here you are, walking out in the dark toward the stars. Lyra suddenly became aware of how hard her heart was pounding in her chest, how close Dean was standing. Her mind was racing, looking for purchase. She noticed how his eyes flicked down to her mouth. In reflex, she returned the gesture. He doesn't honestly think you are under some kind of spell. No. His voice had become soft, close. But I think he likes believing in the possibility of magic. That's just like my pa. He loves to imagine wonderful, hopeful things like that. Lyra felt herself relax a little as the hollowness in her stomach flooded with warmth. And your ma? Did it bother her that he said such things about someone else? I asked her. Dean smiled again. Lyra felt his fingers brush hers, as though asking a question of their own. She twined her fingers with his in answer. A new tension sprang to life inside her. She said that she knows that Pa loves her with all that he has, and she can't begrudge the memory of a woman who borrowed his eye before she met him. Nor will she speak ill of the dead. He registered Lyra's response, even in the dark. I'm sorry. Lyra shook her head and looked to the cliff for a reprieve, but did not let go of his hand. What for? She didn't know why she asked. She knew she'd flinched. For mentioning her. You probably still miss her, and I might have hurt you by speaking of your loss. She studied the contours of his face visible in the moonlight. That's kind of you to say. He seemed closer now, and she wasn't sure if he had stepped nearer or if she had done it when she turned back to him. She could feel the warmth radiating from his tall, broad figure. It was nice in the chill of the night. Her eyes dipped again to his lips, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if the faint stubble on his chin would feel. Dean closed the last breath of distance between them, brushing his mouth gently against hers before she could finish the thought. She didn't notice anything scratchy in the contact. On the contrary, it felt dazzling. Sparkling bolts shot through her, down to her fingers, her toes, weakening her knees, shortening her breath. This must be what it felt like to be a falling star, bright and effervescent and joyous and out of control. His other hand cupped her face, just under her ear, sending another thrilling charge through her as he brought his lips to hers again. Light showered around them as she kissed him back. Lyra had never been kissed before. For her first kiss to be under the starfall, with Dean, was more than she'd imagined. It was enough to convince her that all the stories of magic were true. When they parted, Lyra saw a streak of light reflected in his eyes. They took a small step apart, his hand reluctantly falling from her neck as they looked over the cliff out to sea. The stars were falling in earnest now, the heaviest fall Lyra had ever seen. "You could join us, you know, if your gran would let you when the tap room isn't too busy." "What?" Lyra almost shook her head to clear it, but she didn't want to dispel the magic she felt surrounding them. "To study for the entrance exam. You're planning to apply to university, aren't you?" It was Lyra's turn to let out a small laugh, surprised that he could think of university at that moment. "I would love to, but—" "You have responsibilities at home?" he guessed. "Nothing is for sure yet," Lyra hedged. Unless her luck changed one of these nights, it was certain she would have to stay home. Her family lacked the finances to send her, not just the cost of tuition, room, and board, but also the wages to hire someone to cover the work she'd leave behind. She didn't want to admit any of that to him. She turned back toward the view beyond the cliffs. She wanted to keep her focus on that moment, not the future, not the inevitable disappointments. "Let's sit and watch the stars a little while." They found a relatively flat spot, and Dean sat close, his arm braced behind them in a way that felt like a kind of respectful invitation. Rollo wasted no time curling up on her other side, placing his head on her lap. Lyra spent the rest of the star shower in tense excitement, hyper-aware of Dean next to her, hoping he would lean in and kiss her again. He did. Twice. For the third time that night, Lyra crossed the sleepy hamlet in the dark. She should have been tired, exhausted, really. But the excitement of sitting with Dean through the starfall and then allowing him to hold her hand as he walked her home had energized her. When the stars stopped, she couldn't think of an excuse to stay behind alone. What could she say? "Excuse me while I scour the ground between the cliff's edge and the forest to see if I can find the broken pieces of a fallen star?" No. She couldn't send him away, and she wasn't ready to reveal to him she'd been there to do more than just watch the stars. Instead, she let him walk her home. The exhaustion from a full day of school, work at the inn, then her late-night escapade only hit her as she made it back to finally begin searching. It didn't take long for frustration to overtake her. "There has to be more to it than just wandering and looking at the dark. Don't you agree, Rollo?" The pup yawned and smiled up at her. "Otherwise, any fool can be up here having better luck." He sat patiently next to her, waiting for her next move. Lyra didn't have one, so she joined him on the ground and stroked his head, considering. As fatigue rolled over her, she became aware of a new ache in her chest. No, not new. Different. It had morphed during the night into something more acute than it had been before. On previous nights, Lyra had wandered back and forth with a confident expectation that she would simply find what she was looking for. All the while, the shadow of a pain had been in the dark with her, an ache for something she was missing, or waiting to fall into place. This night, it felt sharpened to a keener edge. Not desperation exactly, but a more earnest want, a need. It was the blade hidden within hope that could prune a heart or maim it. Finding a shard would be the only means to make it possible for her to go to university. It could help a lot of things, really. And if her mother had brought home shards in the past, and she believed Mama had, no matter what she'd said to Gran, then maybe Lyra could too. She also knew what Gran meant when she said that the shards were the reason Lyra was with them. She'd learned over the years of her mother's difficulty carrying a baby, how her parents had tried for years to start a family. She'd realized Mama must have used the magic of wishing on a shard to carry Lyra safely to term. The thought made her almost double over. Why hadn't Mama done the same for her baby brother? Maybe they'd both be alive now. Should Lyra have tried to find a shard back then? She'd been only 10, But perhaps she could have done it. If only she had done more, known more, perhaps she could have saved them both. Rollo made a soft noise, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. She looked down at the sweet little pup, who licked her hand in response. She realized that at some point she'd started crying. "It's all right, boy. I'm all right." She stroked his head until he fell asleep. But the dark turn of her thoughts had done its work, and another melancholy wave washed over her. Lingering grief over the mother she still missed, the little brother she never had the chance to know. The desire to go to university so strong that it hurt. And now, the idea that something could begin with Dean, only for it to be cut short when he inevitably left for school. She was so tired, and really a little embarrassed with herself. She would have to return home, empty-handed once again, and pay the cost of a sleepless night with no reward to show for it. It was easier when she believed no one knew she'd been failing. She closed her eyes and pictured the broken shards of a fallen star, like small pieces of broken glass. Lyra imagined holding them in her hands, feeling them dissolve into nothing as the tears overtook her in earnest. She had been a fool to waste her time on a dream, a fool to get her hopes up. She needed to get her head out of the stars and on to practical matters, to stop wasting her time on something that would never materialize. Lyra stood, letting the melancholy pull her weary feet closer to the cliff's edge. When she was as far as she dared go, she stared at the dark horizon, unable to determine where the sky and sea met. The stars that remained above were still enchanting, even if they were unreachable. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to the silent confessional of the darkness and the sea. Unbidden, Mama's face came to mind, so strongly that Lyra thought she might be hallucinating. Mama smiled at her, the warmth of her mother's love washing over her so powerfully it nearly knocked her down, and for a moment, she feared she would topple over the cliff. She wanted to step back, frightened by the sudden vertigo, but the sensation of love washed over her like a powerful ocean wave, and like a wave, it pulled her closer to the edge. Like a swimmer too far from the shallows, it would mercilessly wrench her out to sea. Lyra took one trembling step forward, another. With each inch, the tug on her heart became stronger. Lyra didn't want to fight the pull, but she was getting too close to the edge. Yet to fight it felt as treacherous as letting her dreams go. She didn't want to let her dreams wither in the inky darkness and die. She wanted them to pull her past the edge of her fears and give her flight. Adrenaline coursed through her body. This was too close. She was too close. But the pull seemed physical somehow, dragging, pulling, urging her to look down, climb down, reach down, to discover what waited in the darkness beyond. Lyra carefully slid one foot back, lowered herself to a knee, and dared look over the edge. There, resting on a small ledge just within reach, lay 3 beautiful, perfect shards of fallen star, gently pulsing a faint glow that Lyra would never have been able to see if she had not come close enough to the edge to look into the darkness beyond. On the way home, Rollo bounded along next to Lyra, as though he'd captured an endless supply of energy from his nap. Or, perhaps, he instinctively understood the elation coming from her, and could not help but share her joy. The joy of a gatherer after stars fall. I hope you enjoyed listening to After Stars Fall by Nicole Wheeler, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Nicole, go to NicoleWheeler.com to find more of her books. This particular story was featured in The Sun Still Rises, an anthology put out in 2023 in honor of Lonnie Forbes, who lost her battle to cancer. All proceeds from the book still go toward Lonnie's family, so I'll have a direct link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it with a friend who loves fantasy. There are links in the show notes to make that as easy as possible for you. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.